In the amber glow of a gaslit parlor, with faint echoes of a clock steadily ticking, not too slow as to stall time, nor too fast as to bring about anxiety, we find ourselves in the heart of Victorian England. A place where the phrase, "beauty is a curse," might not be far from the mark. You see, in the world of the Victorians, possessing a surplus of beauty was as perilous as wearing one's knickers too tight. Imagine a time when being excessively beautiful could make your dance card fuller than a ship at high tide, yet simultaneously make you a curious object of suspicion among society's more, let's say, pious individuals. It was an era of industrial revolution and Queen Victoria's unyielding reign when Narcissus grew not just by the riverbanks, but in society's constitution. Here, the archetype of the gentleman thief ran parallel to the lady of the night, both adorned with the unexpected perils that came with possessing an abundance of good looks. One could imagine a young lady strolling down Piccadilly, her bonnet casting delicate shadows over her porcelain features, every bit the picture of grace and poise, when all the while, underneath layers of lace and propriety, she might just be tiptoeing on a tightrope of scandal and virtue. Being too beautiful could attract suitors like moths to a flame, yes, but not all of them bearing the glow of noble intentions. In a time when the art of courtship involved more strategy than a chess tournament, a handsome face was bait dangling provocatively on the social line. But woe betide the lady whose allure attracted the wrong kind of gentleman, the kind with eyes that roamed as freely as the wild herds upon the hills, and intentions as slippery as an eel on holiday. Such attention invited not just whispers behind fans, but full-blown salvos of reputation-ruining gossip. And let's be honest, the Victorian conversation at tea was often hotter than the teapot itself. Contemplating all this, while wearing ruffles and carrying a parasol fashioned with more structural integrity than a modern-day umbrella, might have felt like an elusive dance between modesty and allure. Too much rouge on the cheeks, scandal, a dress hem an inch too high, outrage, but a striking beauty. Oh, that was another matter entirely. Destined to be both admired and admonished in equal measure, it was a precarious pedestal upon which to balance. One might ask how our ancestors dealt with such perilous gifts. As they hummed lullabies with a side of gossip, they employed a veritable artillery range of societal rules designed to keep the beautiful amongst them in check. Like illustrated guides to parlor games for calamity avoidance, these included how to politely rebuff admirers without causing duels at dawn, and how to flutter one's fan to signal complex emotional states like mildly interested or exceedingly indifferent. In the end, perhaps the danger of beauty lay not in the aesthetic, but in its ability to both petrify and politicize. Our Victorian predecessors wove a societal tapestry of complex etiquette and rigid decorum, curiously choosing to attribute divine responsibility to something as arbitrary as the symmetry of one's visage. It reminds us, dear listener, that whether you were born into a world walking the cobblestone streets of a coal-hazed London, or merely dream of it from your warm, cozy bed today, the weight of appearance has always informed culture and conversation. So, as you gently sink into the marshmallow embrace of slumber, perchance to dream of a time when one's coiffure could cause as much excitement as a telegram from abroad, remember to subscribe to the channel if these stories help you drift off. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. For now, hug your pillow a little tighter as tomorrow's tale is softly waiting on the edge of sleep's horizon. In the swirling mists of Victorian England, where cravats were tight and morals even tighter, it wasn't just corsets and top hats that enforced society's boundaries. In this era of petticoats and parlors, beauty was as much a blessing as it was a backhanded curse. You see, to be considered too beautiful in Victorian society came with enough pitfalls to rival any Dickensian plot twist. So fluff your pillow, dear listener, as we tiptoe through the velvet-clad perils of aesthetic perfection, an adventure best enjoyed with closed eyes and an open mind. The Victorian epoch, in all its ornate splendor, was a time when a woman's beauty was paradoxically celebrated and scorned. While ethereal looks could elevate one's status at a ball, they could just as easily land a lady in a sticky web of societal intrigue, akin to the plots found in the sensation novels of the day. After all, a beautiful woman was expected to embody the virtues of innocence and modesty, yet somehow remain utterly enchanting, a high-wire act on a tightrope of social expectations. Now imagine, if you will, the plight of Miss Lila Thistleton, an unassuming young lady, with a face that could launch 1,000 steamships. Her fame spread across drawing rooms faster than the latest penny dreadful scandal, sparking both admiration and envious whispers among the upper echelons. But underneath the bustle and bonnets lurked an inconvenient truth. Beauty, particularly of the excessive variety, could swiftly disqualify you from being taken seriously. In salons where discourse drifted like perfume, Lila's opinions were as valued as a teacup on a tempest, often overshadowed by her own reflection in those time-honored mirrors. Men, mesmerized by her looks, would often fail to ask about her latest effort with a watercolor or the charities she so avidly supported. An oversight, one might say, more conventional than kind. Beware, though, dear sleeper, for in Victorian England, being too stunning could also draw the eye of the uneasily impressed and the easily upset. Take, for example, Henrietta Fludgerson, a woman whose wit and humor were renowned across the county, yet whose looks were often described in terms as flattering as a cabbage. Henrietta saw in Lila not just a rival for the public's gaze, but also an accidental adversary in the chess-like games of society. And so, with a determination matched only by the resolve of Queen Victoria herself, Henrietta took up the pen, not to write a letter of challenge, but a sonnet laced with satirical venom. In it, she politely lambasted the very concept of beauty as a veil that obscures the true intellect within, earning a round of quiet applause and raising a few eyebrows among the crowd of parasol-wielding spectators. It wasn't just petty rivalries that too much beauty could incite. No, it tended to attract the amorous attentions of poets and painters, those keen purveyors of romantic chaos. Poets with quills sharp enough to endanger pigeons would often besiege our dear Lila with verse after verse, claiming to pine for her with a passion only plausible in stanzas. One might argue, however, that their verses were more focused on pleasing publishers than the muses they professed to adore. Yet herein lies another danger. A rumor, like a mischievous child, once out, is near impossible to rein in. It was whispered, no, trumpeted, that those who sat for portraits could be subject to reputational calamity. It was alleged that Gustavus Silvertongue, a painter whose name, though invented here, surely mirrors someone real, had unveiled a portrait that, flatteringly, exaggerated his subject's beauty. An artful expression of artistic license, or an implicature that those subject to his brush might lack such beauty in reality. Thankfully for our overburdened beauties, these challenges were often faced with tutelage in the art of quipping, and an understanding that the eternal beauty of the self is impervious to the ephemeral nature of societal conventions. But this Victorian tale of loveliness edged with lunacy doesn't end here. As you sink further into slumber, rest assured that the melodic lull of this historical snippet will guide you into a curious night's voyage as we eventually unravel more mysteries that transcend the simplicity of mere appearances. Sweet dreams await, with otherworldly tales blending fact and fancy just around the corner, drifting through time and the veils of slumber. Oh, the Victorian era, a time when being born with perfect looks was as much a curse as it was a blessing. Picture this: London streets bustling with horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps casting a soft, flickering glow on the cobblestones. Society was at a peculiar intersection of prudishness and fascination with the human form. Women were the belles of the social ball, but under such bizarre pressure that their very beauty had to be hidden lest it caused a scandalous, sick stir. Close your eyes and let us wander through this paradox together. Imagine young Charlotte Lynch, a fictional yet altogether possible case. Her beauty was so striking that when she took a stroll in Hyde Park, gentlemen's monocles would spontaneously pop out and land in their cappuccino-coloured waistcoats. But Charlotte had mastered the art of the Victorian camouflage, the ostrich feather bonnet, a portable eclipse that doubled as a fashion statement and a device for obscuring arguably criminal levels of attractiveness. The stakes were higher than one might initially think. A too beautiful woman risked being seen as morally suspect. Too much attention, and her reputation might be thrown into the turmoil akin to a tea party disrupted by a sudden downpour. You see, during this period, beauty was often equated with lack of virtue, as if dripping attractiveness indicated an inner hurricane of moral debauchery. Our dear Charlotte, perhaps out of sheer necessity, had a practical sense of whimsy. She found solace in the menagerie of habits these societal pressures produced, a quaint symphony of fans unfurling like small tornadoes across a ballroom, attempting to bashfully brush away attention as if it were some pesky summer fly. But the crown jewel of Victorian peculiarities in beauty regulation was the notion of the vital glow. Fashionable at the time was a certain pallor of the skin, a look of delicate fragility, as though the wearer had just performed a heart-wrenching aria after recovering from a conveniently theatrical bout of dizziness. Were you looking too radiant? Not to worry. Rely on a friend, one with sympathetic aims, to apply the most flattering duo of fashion accessories: a parasol to deflect sunlight, supplemented by an arsenic-laden face powder, known to bestow the consumer with the saintly glow of the sickly yet pious. It is almost comical to us now, how intentional fainting and a flourish of lace could set the scene for debutante drama. But back then, it was as serious a business as getting your name in the social column neatly alongside those of the dukes, duchesses, and perhaps the odd earl who had rather an unfortunate taste in neckwear. There was an intricate dance to maintain between the right amount of frailty and a wealth of mysterious allure. A more brazen Charlotte might challenge what it meant to protect or project her beauty by slyly sauntering without her lace gloves, or gasp hidden in the drawl, breaking the cruel cycle of corsetry by actually breathing comfortably, perhaps even eating a second meringue. Mercy! As we float through these oddly enchanting practices of the past, let us consider just how these elaborate rituals, spun on the spindle of societal expectation, created an entire framework of bedtime lore. Gentle ripples turned transformed into tales of Victorian nightmares, wherein beauty itself became a dangerous dance partner, a seemingly benevolent surface hiding the sharp thorns of scandal. Feel the pages of history whisper around you, as nuanced as the listless lullabies of yesteryear London brought into the quiet hum of bedtime tales today. How soothing it is to look backward and forward all at once, to understand, yet to step softly back into the warm fabric of dreams where beauty need not require veil or varnish. As night draws deeper, whisper goodnight to Charlotte, to her feather plume, her illuminating yet non-iridescent complexion, and to the softly spoken secrets locked away in the tangles of Victorian decorum. Drift gently, for soon we will explore another captivating element of this paradoxical era. The Victorian era, a time when the Industrial Revolution transformed society faster than a steam engine could chug along the tracks. But while factories and locomotives whirred with progress, another silent revolution was taking hold in the elaborate parlors and bustling ballrooms of high society. The art of deception, or as we might call it, the delicate dance of appearing appropriately beauty-laden without, heaven forbid, being too beautiful. Picture the scene. It's the height of the social season in 1875, the air thick with the scent of lavender and scandal, a bustling assembly of the who's who of London's creme de la creme. Here, amidst carefully arranged calling cards and cucumber sandwiches, beauty was not just a gift, it was a minefield more treacherous than a game of lawn croquet without protective eyewear. Much like an eagerly anticipated waltz, each step was choreographed with the precision of an elaborate social ballet. Those mere mortals who were blessed, or beset, depending on your perspective, with an excessively appealing visage, faced a social conundrum wildly different from the concerns our reflection-obsessed modern selves might consider. Let us now meander through the charming quirkiness of Victorian etiquette, examining why a little too much beauty could land one in quite the pickle. In this time of tightly corseted morals and neatly trimmed moustaches, beauty was a currency that could rival the guineas gleefully jingling in one's pocket watch-clad waistcoat. But with great beauty, dear listener, came great suspicion. An overly exquisite appearance could spark rumors swifter than a top hat could tip. Might this fair damsel have a shocking secret? Perhaps an artist's muse with a painterly indiscretion in the family? Or, clutch your pearls, a French ancestor? Scandalous attachments could ruin one's prospects faster than you could say luncheon invitations. Indeed, society had its ways of ensuring a harmonious facade. Young ladies were encouraged to exhibit not just charm and appeal, but also a certain decorous mediocrity. They had to tread the fine line of allure with the sensibility of a matronly housekeeper, ensuring the tea remains properly steeped. Too fetching by half might suggest a lack of moral fortitude. After all, who could possibly maintain virtue under such felicity of form? The societal conundrum was akin to icing a cake in a room where everyone is on a perpetual sugar-free diet. Beauty, it seems, required taming and tempering, much like a rambunctious pony expected to trot politely at afternoon tea. Adorable freckles were promptly dismissed with concoctions involving lemon juice and buttermilk, recipes that might make a fine sauce, but perhaps not so much as skin treatment. Nose too buxom, tweaks and tucks, courtesy of fainting couch-worthy devices, promised perfected profiles. And should one's cheeks bloom with innate rosiness, well, enter the age-old tale of the porcelain complexion, achieved by lathering on enough rice powder to thicken a custard or two. All to maintain that illusion of appropriately classifiable health. Our Victorian forebears delighted in masquerading beneath flimsy facades of refinement, crafting personas with the dexterity of magicians. And how could they not, when overly conspicuous beauty was liable to stir as much whispered intrigue as envy? With the societal stakes as high as an ornamental Gothic window, discretion in beauty was deemed vital to securing a sensible suitor. In this tender dance of social graces, the art of subtly subduing one's God-given allure encapsulated the eccentric paradoxes of the age. Resplendent beauty, like a grand chandelier hovering over an opulent dining table, was best dimmed to avoid blinding the quotidian dreams of others. So, as you settle into a serene tableau of shadowed candlelight and quiet contemplation, reflect on the mimsy muse of beauty's bygones. Prepare yourself for the next gentle escapade through time, which, fair traveller, may involve even more delicious tales from this tangled tapestry of Victorian quirk and whimsy. Delight in the company of thoughts, both enlightening and drowsy, as your eyelids grow ever heavier, soothed by the melody of history's whispering lullabies. Ah, the illustrious Victorian era, where the phrase, "too much of a good thing," took on an entirely new, ruffle-laden significance. Picture, if you will, a society so enamored with beauty that if you found yourself possessing a truly breathtaking visage, you might also find yourself in a bit of a pickle. It was like being gifted a delectable cake, only to discover it was made entirely of marzipan, a blessing, yet oddly daunting. In Victorian England, beauty could be as perilous as a tempest on the moors, a bit Bronte-esque, one might say. This period, filled with corsets tighter than a miser's purse strings and powdered noses reflecting moonlight like polished silver, held the traits of pulchritude in high, albeit suspicious regard. The ovarious term, too beautiful, could actually spell one's downfall, much like the overconfidence of a dandy striding too close to the edge of a freshly tarred street. You see, the discussion over the dangers of beauty wasn't confined to the drawing rooms and parlours, but often found its way into the columns of Seacham popular periodicals. Articles surreptitiously wondered about comely appearances. Was beauty tethered to moral fragility? Were these angelic features merely coquettish masks for duplicity. Victorian society, in its fervour for categorising everything from plants to people, often remarked on the potential hazards of extreme beauty, imagining a frail psyche behind exquisitely sculpted cheekbones. Oh, the scandalising hypotheses spun delicately from that loom. The era was positively abuzz with scientific studies, all the rage at dinner parties and intellectual gatherings. Picture a circle of gentlemen in their smoke-filled drawing room, mutton chop whiskers positively twitching with self-importance, discoursing over a delicious irony. Obsessive interest led to findings that proved beautiful women were not only prone to hysteria, but fascinated by decorative objects, gaudy jewellery, and an abundance of sensational gossip. Alas, who would have thought? Is it any wonder that such revelations set tongues wagging faster than a pug chasing a squirrel? But let's sidestep into the peculiar case study of Miss Letitia Featherplume, a renowned beauty whose visage was rumoured to cause fainting spells amongst those caught unawares. Fancy that. Letitia was thrust into high society immediately upon reaching the tender age of debutante status. Her beauty became so potent a threat that she was advised, and yes, dear listener, actually advised, to wear spectacles at all times. Her vigilant parentage hoped that they'd temper her allure and bestow an air of seriousness, although in reality, they made her look like a perpetually surprised owl trying to read the small print. Her notoriety for being too beautiful hindered her matrimonial prospects, as eligible suitors and their mothers trembled at the thought of her stunning loveliness being either a distraction or a burden that could only be matched by the citrus tang of artificial orange glow exuding from roasted lamp oil, one might whisper with a bemused chuckle. Moreover, Letitia's appearance engendered a distrust, giving rise to urban legends. Tales swirled around her like chiffon on a windy day, suggesting she must possess some fanciful enchantress's secrets to maintain such ethereal charms. It wasn't until Letitia exchanged her spectacles for a more conventional pair of spectacles, those of dull propriety, that society began welcoming her into the drawing rooms without whispers of supernatural intervention. Redemption, it seemed, came not in the form of reduced beauty, but of accepted tedium, allowing her beauty to be comfortably placed in the realm of the natural instead of the mystical. So, as you gently sink into the cozy embrace of your linens, ponder the peculiar balancing act of beauty during the Victorian era, an era as complex and layered as its residents' attire, and truthfully, as mystifying as marmalade on cod. Let us now allow our minds to drift away upon clouds of lavender-scented dreams, lingering on this fragile beauty of times gone by, as we gently turn the page to explore the curiosities that the Victorian night still holds in its embrace. In the delicate game of Victorian society, beauty was both a blessing and a curse. Surely being, as they said, a looker might earn you a seat at the best tea parties, but those enviable cheekbones could also lead you down a path of intrigue and peril. In an era that cherished decorum almost as much as a properly starched cravat, being too easy on the eyes was not without its peculiar hazards. The Victorians, in their unwavering embrace of propriety, viewed beauty with a blend of admiration and suspicion. Much like the delicate china that adorned their drawing rooms, there was always the lurking fear that it might shatter under scrutiny, or worse, lead one into scandal. Indeed, being a ravishing rose in a society full of violets could land you at the heart of gossipy whispers faster than you could say, corset. Take, for instance, poor, unfortunate Esmeralda Finch, who possessed the kind of natural allure that even an overzealous use of arsenic-laden face powder couldn't diminish. With hair that shimmered like a raven's wing and eyes the colour of a rainy day sea, Esmeralda was the very picture of Victorian beauty. However, this woman of uncommon loveliness quickly learned that her radiance was as much a beacon for trouble as it was for marriage prospects. Not long after stepping into the social world, dazzling enough to make even the Queen's potted ferns blush, the fanfare turned to murmurs. Esmeralda's allure became the subject of great scrutiny, leading to unfortunate episodes of mistaken identity. When Sir Reginald Bumblepot, a man distinguished mainly by his flourishing mutton chops, accused her of leading his heart astray when he glimpsed her from across a ballroom. The stage was set for calamity. Mistakenly identified as the clandestine breaker of hearts, Esmeralda found herself under the shadow of the Auburn scandal, a tale concocted from the balderdash that is the envy of writers of melodrama everywhere. She was said to have been seen whispering sweet nothings to a dozen would-be suitors, none of whom she had ever actually met. Those offering this narrative seemed blithely unconcerned that her supposed exploits were physically impossible unless she owned a dirigible to flit from one balcony to another. Still, the gossip persisted. It seeped into her daily life, like the dampness in a drafty parlor. Invitations dwindled. Eyes once admiring began to assess her with calculated chilliness, and whispers worked their crafty way into the fabric of every social gathering. Esmeralda's beauty, it seemed, had turned against her, and it wasn't long before she found herself ostracized, not unlike a summer fruitcake, regifted from one neighbor to the next until it vanishes completely. And so, dear dreamers, here we find the moral tangled in ribbon and lace, a beauty's story blurring into the edges of dreamland. For being too lovely was indeed risky in those times, a danger wrapped in suspicion and delivered with a side of societal submission. As the gossamer drapes of sleep draw around Esmeralda and her velvet world of whispers, we are left to ponder how beauty, much like a carriage ride on a foggy London evening, could lead one into unexpected turns. But let us not dwell too long on these curious passages. Instead, let the night carry you gently through misty corridors where more quiet tales await their turn to unfurl. In the candlelit haze of Victorian society, beauty was a double-edged sword, as sharp as the finest corset boning. Imagine wandering the posh streets of 19th century London, where the air is thick with the scent of coal smoke and opportunity, and fashionably narrow streets are buzzing with women in voluminous skirts laden with elaborate layers of fabric. Yet beneath those seemingly immaculate exteriors lay whispers of a strange yet very Victorian dilemma: the peril of possessing an excess of beauty. Our story today centers on the curious case of Miss Edith Whatsit, a belle of consequence whose face could purportedly cause flowers to bloom out of season. Edith's cheeks glowed with an artist's finest pinks, and her eyes were of a blue said to rival even the sky's brightest hues. Yet what sounds like a blessing was a concern for her dear old father, Sir Reginald Whatsit, who worried excessively about the fate of his daughter's beauty. For in Victorian society, to be too beautiful was not merely a compliment, it was practically a hazard, a sort of occupational hazard of being an eligible young lady. You see, an abundance of beauty was thought to attract a variety of undesirable consequences, not the least of which were the daydreams occupied by the swooning poets and penniless suitors. Sir Reginald would mutter anxiously over his warm cup of tea, fretting audibly about the impractical and occasionally peculiar risks that beauty brought. In those days, beware the overly eager admiration of strangers and friends alike. A woman's finest asset soon became an expensive liability, requiring vigilant protection. To illustrate, imagine Edith ambling through a lush garden party, flocked by wave after wave of admirers, some rather dodgy ones, professionally inclined to write sonnets in fits of desperate zeal. Her elegant parasol, much like her protective aura, didn't provide much cover. There were also the disquieting illnesses that physicians could mysteriously diagnose if a young woman spent too long praising herself in the mirror, an unknown malady they titillatingly termed vanity-induced ailments. Yes, physicians were wholly convinced that an excess of admiration could, startlingly, lead to a touch of the vapors, or worse, hysteria. To bolster the defenses against such improbable perils, Edith's doting governess, who was quite unused to the fuss and positively remembered as the stern-looking one with the elaborate chin ribbon, would repetitively chide her for smiling too widely, lest her countenance show signs of delight, most uncommonly regarded as scandalous. Edith was advised to cultivate a demeanor of cool politeness, such that her charm might be tempered enough to allow her suitors an opportunity to display themselves without undue distraction. Even more curiously, society matriarchs, with their pearls tightly strung, might express concern over Edith's so-called plight and worriedly suggest redecorating her entirely. Dearest Edith, do wear a hat of more sensible proportions, otherwise you'll be frightening the birds away. And avoid gazing into reflective surfaces, as they might magnify your attributes rather indecently, they might declare with furtively exaggerated earnestness. However, this ritualistic parade of admonitions did little to interrupt the perennial sparkle of Edith's occu spirit. While she played her part beautifully in the tapestry of society's masks, inwardly, she harbored not only a shrewd awareness of these parlor games, but also the buoyant resilience to swim through them with aplomb. Unlike the women positively thwarted by the very design of idealized grace, Edith embraced the humor buried within social strictures, and by doing so, she savored her beauty's allure with quaint bemusement. Endearing Edith's tale is not solely of bygone whimsy, but more a reminder of how society, each era sculpted uniquely, fashions its own curious dance around concepts of beauty. We leave our dear Miss Whatsit in a softly illuminated drawing room where her laughter fills the corners once shadowed by the tiresome judgments of faux propriety. Indeed, Edith sits comfortably by the window, ready to continue her adventure as a luminous touchstone in a world infatuated with polished presentations. And as the gas lamps flicker gently outside, we drift onward, curiosity piqued, to our next tale in the leafy tapestry of Victorian wonders. Imagine a world where scandal lurked in every corner, where a casual sideways glance could trigger a symphony of gasps among tightly corseted matrons. The Victorian era was undoubtedly a playground for the dramatic, where being too beautiful was often as perilous as having a loose hem in high society. Let us voyage to the salons and parlors of this curious epoch, where possessing a striking visage was practically an invitation to a melodrama fit for 1,000 gaslit stages. To be too beautiful could mean wielding a power as volatile as a barrel of Victorian gunpowder. Allow me to introduce you to the concept of beauty traps, where looking a little too enchanting could cause quite the stir in one's delicate social life, akin to overbrewed tea at a duchess's afternoon gathering. Picture the eligible young ladies of the era, those who had perfected the art of the genteel swoon. Their beauty, the precious currency in the marriage market, was often a double-edged sword, or perhaps a double-edged fan, wafting both adoration and judgment. The public eye, quick to seek out the slightest hint of impropriety, often viewed these fair maidens with suspicion. Was their beauty a blessing, bestowed by angels, or a cunning stratagem devised by, dare I say, scandalous forces? Let's visit a fictional soirée at the estate of Lady Euphemia Winterbrook, a society darling known more for her astounding collection of porcelain spaniels than for her entertaining skills. Her grand drawing room was the battlefield where society's invisible wars were won and lost. Guests mingled, wafting the scent of rosewater and old gossip, as tales of bewitchingly beautiful women who mysteriously distracted suitors occupied the conversation. Consider Miss Arabella Fitzcharles, a beguiling beauty with eyes like twin chalices of Pemberley blue. Arabella's entrance into any room was the equivalent of dropping a single, perfect pebble into a very still pond. The ripples were inevitable. Her beauty was both enchanting and ever so slightly fearsome. Parents worried their sons might lose their wits, or worse, elope without a proper farewell to the family portrait. There was also the curious case of Rosamond Clemency, whose beauty was of such renown that whispers in the tea rooms hinted she must have struck a devilish bargain, perhaps with the perfumed ladies section at the local department store. Rosamond dared not stroll into a garden party unaccompanied, lest she set too many hearts aflame. Her mere presence was enough to inspire poets to compose verses long after dessert was served, and ladies began politely assessing the various feathered hats on the opposite side of the room. Oh, the dangers of being too beautiful. While some used their captivating visages as passports to traverse the corridors of power, Others found themselves ensnared in webs of malicious whispers, the sorts of narratives that could only be conjured in the most shadowy corners of high-tea discourse. Yet irony, that mischievous companion to history, often saw these very same whispers boosting the social stock of the subject tenfold. In a place where the sun occasionally strained to peek through heavy brocade curtains, beauty itself could become a gilded cage of expectations and suspicions. How exhausting it must have been to navigate a world where a feigned feint or artfully dropped handkerchief could be misconstrued as anything from a calculated flirtation to a formal declaration of war. And so, as you begin to drift gently on the sea of slumber, let's salute the charming and obstinate spirits of those Victorians. They were masters of disguise, skillful managers of appearances who danced elegantly between desire and duty. Imagine their tales as delicate tapestries, woven with threads of laughter, implausible coincidences, and of course the occasional eyebrow-raising scandal. Now, as the grand piano of consciousness plays its final notes for the evening, let your mind wander to more tales of yore, where the evening fog wraps its tendrils softly around a city of cobblestones and secrets, as the foggy tendrils of history continue to gently envelop us. We find ourselves tiptoeing delicately into the realm of Victorian beauty, a domain where the art of the parasol twirl reached its zenith, and where one's facial symmetry could unwittingly tiptoe along the precipice of peril. During a time when corsets were as tight as courtship rules, being blessed, or some might say, cursed, with exquisite beauty was not merely a superficial issue. No, it could play as much drama as any Bronte novel with its swirling tensions and scenic moorlands. The era thrummed with a curious undercurrent. Beauty was both celebrated in sonnets and feared like an overzealous pianoforte recital. Picture this. It's a sullenly atmospheric afternoon in Victorian London where the clouds seem to practice a form of social modesty, only allowing the sun to peek bashfully between their thick ranks. Miss Eliza Trenton, renowned for her ethereal beauty, sits in her drawing room, a sanctuary resembling an elegant patchwork quilt made of different shades of drapery. Even the teacups seem to blush, their delicate porcelain facades reflecting Eliza's renowned grace. However, beneath this serene surface, danger brewed more potently than her aunt's infamous elderberry wine. Mere days ago, during a particularly lively ball, Eliza had caught the wandering eye of Lord Julian Whittington, a man said to be so charming that his reflection offered him a standing ovation each morning. As was the custom, Lord Julian promptly schemed to win her heart, perhaps by daringly engaging her in a discussion about the pros and cons of lace doilies or the emerging architecture of opera houses. Yet, as it turns out, enchanting as she was, Eliza's beauty posed what they might have called a worrisome equation. Her angelic visage could attract not only the affections of potential suitors, but also the ire of those who struggled under their own, shall we say, less blessed countenances. Rivalry brewed like an oversteeped Earl Grey as the less favoured maidens of the ton scribbled furiously in diaries, crafting poems that lovingly rhymed Eliza with Sizey. It was during an idyllic promenade in Hyde Park that the sinister nature of beauty's burden reared its head. Word had inevitably slipped to Mrs. Winifred Nickersworth, self-appointed arbiter of all things sufficiently scandalous. Mrs. Nickersworth, whose hats were said to double as rudimentary dirigibles, took unbridled offense at Eliza's radiance overshadowing her daughter's parrot-like sartorial efforts. Sitting under a shade-providing elm, Mrs. Nickersworth concocted a scheme to enroll Eliza in a faux art class that was, in fact, a ruse designed to educate her out of her alarming beauty. The so-called art classes consisted of sessions focusing on applying a liberal amount of soot, arranged creatively, of course, to the cheeks, yielding the illusion that Eliza was just another average Victorian subject caught in a chimney collapse, not the stunning beauty that she was. Oh, it was an arduous time, a jolly pincushion of societal expectations meeting headlong with aesthetic reality. Yet, our dear Eliza tackled it with grace. She found solace in her pianoforte, banging softly yet humorously as her fingers fluttered over the keys, echoing the rhythms of existence while playfully denying the absurd game she was caught within. Eventually, it was the steadfast suitor, Lord Julian, who devised a plan as cunning as his twinkle was bright, inviting Eliza to be his muse for a new exhibition titled True Beauty, featuring portraits of young women troubled, though not vanquished, by societal foibles. With a quirk of his brow that could rival any Dickensian rogue, he ensured that Eliza could flaunt her loveliness guilt-free under the guise of artistic genius. Thus, harmony was restored, as it is likely to be in such tales. Our newly liberated Eliza became both admired and ironically envied for her role in a spectacle celebrating beauty in all its forms, whimsical, wistful, or shall we say, whimsically perilous. And yet, like a well-finished cup of chamomile tea, the story of Victorian beauty and its peculiar perils leaves us both content and contemplative. As puffy clouds recall tales of corsets and crinoline, one wonders what elegant anecdotes await as our carriage drifts gently down the cobblestone lane into the next chapter of history's captivating slumber. In the dimly gaslit parlours of Victorian London, where shadows danced with whispers and lace draped over every conceivable surface, being too beautiful was a badge both of honour and of dread. For in an era enraptured by modesty yet seduced by the scandalous, beauty was a double-edged sword, adored openly in sonnets, yet quietly counselled against in drawing rooms. You see, amid the fussy etiquette manuals and the elaborate tea rituals, there lurked a peculiar kind of peril for the exceedingly attractive. Now, imagine waking up in the morning to the sound of local gossip fluttering through your window like a nosy sparrow, carrying news of a recent influx of swooning gentlemen cluttering the streets. You might think, romance is in bloom. But alas, many a young Victorian maiden was left peering through lace curtains, eyes wide with concern. After all, wasn't it Oscar Wilde who quipped something about every second social call feeling like the plot of Greek tragedy? For the Victorians, excessive beauty was almost a social faux pas, a bit like wearing your corsets on the outside. Everyone would notice, but few would approve. The infamous "too beautiful" label could result in stern lectures from Aunt Prudence about the virtues of restraint and the perils of vanity, all delivered while primping under a frilly bonnet fashioned to look like a cake decoration. Beauty, unchecked, might even lead to one's portrait hanging flamboyantly in a gallery, a fate perilous to one's reputation and extremely time-consuming when it came to removing dust. And while some decried their stunning features as completely unintentional, a path wrought with exquisitely tied silk ribbons, others grimly resigned themselves to mustache-twirling suitors with questionable credentials in gentility. Indeed, the social calamity was such that the bodice rippers, those magnificent novels whispered about but never openly discussed, crafted tales where beauty, unchecked, led women astray into erratic happiness marred by jewelry theft and, heaven forbid, traveling without a chaperone. Add to this delightful jumble the ever-watchful chaperones, those loyal hounds of propriety ever stationed at your flank at balls. They would eye larger-than-life looks as if sifting for an illicit diamond at the bottom of a teacup, ensuring that young ladies never fell foul of unscrupulous charmers masquerading as noble Brits. Lest we fall asleep too soon under the spell of Miss Havisham's cobweb tales, let's not forget the alchemy of the beauty treatment. Yes, I refer to arsenic wafers, hopefully used in moderation. Sold with the promise of translucent skin, they were mysteriously packaged in boxes bearing grave warnings written in fine print. Truly, Victorian society operated on a beautiful paradox, relying completely on mischievous science to maintain such misleadingly effortless allure. Take, if you will, the tale of Lady Winifred Honeysuckle, her story being spectacularly mundane yet peculiarly emblematic of her times. Known for eyes described poetically as the hue of a bluish puddle and a forehead Smooth as scandal, she had the utter misfortune of being both beautiful and interested in beetle classification, a double threat that led to many hushed consultations by her weary parents. Alas, poor Winifred's charms went unthwarted. She married not a duke, but a charming entomologist from Leicester of no discernible wealth or title. Thus, rumour had it, she spent her days gazing upon her husband's bug collection, quite literally preserved in bliss. And yet, as Wade Bassing Hadley would retell in hushed tones, her adventure persisted not in the annals of matchmaking, but rather in the rarefied circles of beetle taxonomy. The severity of her perceived sorrow was mitigated in due time. After all, domesticity did prove beneficial to that particular ladybug population. The beauty scorn we speak of, though humorous, was largely a caution. It reminded the populace that beneath the lace and the collars, human nature crudely persisted. If one looked deeply enough, or perhaps just donned the era's many fashionable layers, one might witness a curious convergence of loveliness and peril as established by Victorian standards. As the moonlight seeped gently over the domes of Victorian society, blending our reverie with fact, it wrote its own whimsical bedtime prayers upon the quietude of drawing rooms. And as we glide quietly away from these shimmering corridors of beauty fear, we find ourselves wondering what epistolary elegance might await us in the next fold of history, where another gentle mystery sneaks around the corner. In the heart of Victorian society, where social decorum was as elaborate as the lace-trimmed curtains that swayed gently in an afternoon breeze, there was a peculiar challenge faced by those deemed too beautiful. Picture this: a society where an accidental flash of ankle could cause a man to drop his monocle in scandalized delight. Beauty, my dear listener, was a double-edged sword, and mastering it required nothing short of tactical prowess. Let us embark together on this whimsical journey where beauty was both a blessing and, curiously enough, a societal peril. Imagine our heroine, Arabella Smythe, whose radiant beauty was matched only by her unerring ability to avoid feather-brained suitors. Her complexion was the envy of every artist who ever tried to capture the elusive glow of a sunset, yet her charm was not in her visage alone. Arabella's true mastery lay in her art of evasion. You see, in an era where one's eligibility was judged by the symmetry of facial features and the unblemished hue of one's skin, Arabella was often accused of witchcraft. Yes, you heard that right. Witchcraft. Such supernatural slander was the go-to accusation when failing to comprehend how someone could maintain flawless skin in a London thick with fog and coal dust. Patent leather boots were no match for her, but the whispering gentry could prove a different foe. Arabella's tale is steeped in both humor and cautious wit. She navigated salons with the grace of a swan, or perhaps a particularly poised duck, depending on the ambient tea party hubbub. Each social function was a minefield of matchmaking mothers and economically advantageous bachelors. Ironically, it was Arabella's self-administered title of perennial fiancée that kept many a rake at bay, for fear of ruining the mysterious allure that an unseizable prospect offered. One cannot forget the equally besieged gentlemen of the time. Those too handsome were suspect, often whispered to have made increasingly complex pacts with vanity rather than the devil. Charles Fanshawe, a dandy if ever there was one, learned quickly the perils of having too fine a nose. A snappy dress sense and well-groomed moustache led him to believe that strolls across Hyde Park would be pleasant endeavors, until frantic gangs of bonnet-clad admirers made off with his favorite hat, not once, but thrice. Jiminy, as one might affectionately utter, it must have been quite stressful to find oneself popular to the peril of one's pocketbook and dignity. The Victorian era, with its fascination for phrenology, did attempt to decode attractiveness, though it basically involved inspecting one's skull for lumps, like a vicar checking for unseemly thoughts. Pseudoscience had a certain je ne sais quoi back then, mainly in serving up whimsical explanations for why the supremely charming suffered mightily from flocks of admirers. Not that Arabella or Charles particularly took heed of such outlandish theories, but it is said that both possessed a cherished accessory, the uniquely Victorian invention of the fan shield. This ingenious contraption, mistaken for high fashion, held a dual purpose, delighting one's audience while also allowing for the modest deployment of a barrier against overly intrusive interest. As the evening grows quiet and the familiar sound of water boils gently for another pot of chamomile tea, let us pause on this topic of covert beauty strategies and fanciful social dances. Worry not, for the story of Victorian-era charm is like a fine lace handkerchief, intricately woven and endlessly fascinating. As Arabella's fan closes silently in the darkened parlour, and Charles retrieves his hat from an obliging hedgehog, misunderstanding it for a cozy abode, allow your mind to drift gently away. A new chapter awaits us just beyond the horizon, where tales of beauty and eccentricity unfold with cozy familiarity. In the heart of Victorian society, hidden amidst a rumble of lace and etiquette, there existed a clandestine concern. Being too beautiful could be downright hazardous. It may sound like the opening to a peculiar fairy tale, but in the 19th century, being excessively attractive could place you in quite a pickle. Imagine, if you will, a time when being the belle of the ball could have its own sinister pitfalls, with perils that could make even Rapunzel's tower seem cozy in comparison. Picture a swirl of corsets, crinolines and coiffed hair, all set against the foggy, gaslit backdrop of London. Here, the beauty blight wasn't simply about dodging overly enthusiastic suitors equipped with overly flowery poems. No, the stakes were a pinch higher. Get ready to dive into a tale where beauty meets bureaucracy in an utterly Victorian fashion. In this world of fussy fashion, our glamorous ladies face the peculiar peril of their looks, leading to accusations of undue influence, a term that, while seemingly benign, could stir more gossip than a particularly lively teapot. A rather famous case in 1867 saw high society mired in scandal when lovely heiress Florence, caught in her own beauty trap, was accused of being so enchanting that she had monumentally persuaded her dear uncle into some very precarious financial decisions. Her looks, it seemed, were actually fraudulent on paper. Accusations weren't the only hazards lurking in the mirrored shadows of vanity. There was also the shivery spectre of madness. Yes, indeed, some Victorian doctors, in their infinite wisdom, and perhaps boredom, claimed that excess beauty could lead to hysteria. Their theory? Too much beauty, like too much of any good thing, could bubble up a lady's mind and cause such delightful symptoms as nervous laughter, fainting, and a penchant for parlour performances. Quite the repertoire. However, not all was dire and dreary in the land of pretty peril. Many a young woman turned this burden into an adventurous opportunity, donning mild disguises worthy of a Dickensian plot just to navigate the capricious currents of society. Hats pulled low, rebellious ringlets tucked away, they moved with newfound freedom across the bustling city streets, even daring to poke their spectacles into abhorred bookstores. This was, naturally, before being dragged back to the hamlet of haute couture. Yes, such was the taxing life of a lady with too much visage in the days of waistcoats and wigs, where society's penchant for melodrama and moral judgment knew no bounds. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, many women found an understated power in these societal quirks. Though it sounds like the stuff of fiction, our intrepid heroines used this veiled danger as a cloak, maneuvering through the high-stakes ballrooms with enviable finesse. As the clock chimes closer to midnight and the gaslights start their gentle flicker against the deep topaz night, one can't help but imagine what our Victorian vixens would say, basking in the glories of modernity's flexibility. Would they marvel at our liberties, chuckle over today's peculiar fashion trends, or perhaps embrace the freedom of a well-loved hoodie without a corset in sight? With these musings tucked into our minds like comforting quilts, we drift forward, deeper into the intricate web of Victorian society, pondering the next intricate tale woven into the rich tapestry of history, a tale featuring scandal, society, and perhaps even a touch of romance, sprinkled with laughter under the glow of a moonlit sky. As we quietly tiptoe into the world of Victorian society, like a feather-light dance, step across a creaking floorboard, let us delve into the delightfully odd dangers that beauty posed in this snug era of lace and caution. Picture, if you will, a time when looking a tad too striking could leave you caught up in quite the societal whirlwind, like an elaborate waltz that you didn't entirely agree to join. Prowling about the cobblestones and countryside alike, we find that being too beautiful was no small matter, dear dreamers. It was almost as if a saving of civilization itself hung precariously upon our handsome heroines, possessing just the right amount of charm. Evocative career, isn't it? The beauty barometer in the Victorian age was exacting, to say the least, balancing somewhere between being fit for a portrait in the local gallery and keeping the gossips at bay. Let us focus on none other than the legend of beautiful Elizabeth Siddal. Her flaxen hair alone was a marvel of enchanting proportion. Discovered by the pre-Raphaelite circle, this ethereal muse, champagne, bubbled her way through the art world like a sprite, amidst bumbles and blunders aplenty. She sat for artists, her form frozen in their genius strokes, not dreaming at the time that her visage would grace a myriad of canvases. And there it was. Her beauty gossiped about over teacups and sugar cubes as the ultimate comely conundrum. In this tale of twist and turn, our fair Elizabeth perched upon the needle edge of Victorian ideals. It's all fun and art until someone has to bathe in an ice-cold bath for hours merely to achieve an artistic vision. Yes, Elizabeth herself valiantly braved hypothermia, prone in a bath, for none other than the cherished Ophelia painting by Sir John Everett Millis. Risking one's health for beauty, quite literally, was evidently the epitome of Victorian practicality. The thorny price of being enchanting, you ask? A chilly reality indeed. As we unravel further into this delicate tapestry, let us breeze along to the societal repercussions of exquisite features. Such a gift came as a double-edged sword. Picture, if you will, being too much for the delicate constitutions of local bachelors and their swooning syndicate. Matchmaking was as precarious as balancing a teacup upon the head of a curious cat. Love-struck gentlemen, much to their aghast discontent, were sometimes even rendered speechless at the sight of a true Victorian beauty. Reducing oneself to a befuddled silence was evidently all the rage at afternoon tea. Those caught in the storm of striking allure also faced the fashion commandments, which came as a helpful list printed by some entrepreneurial haberdasher whilst possibly wearing a monocle. "Thou shalt not resemble thy portrait" may have been one such sartorial decree, achieved perhaps through togged layers of velvet sagging in unison. A woman who dared to always look her best without a flattering portrayal to hide behind was teasingly towing the line of acceptability. What a delightful game of hide-and-seek fashion must have been. Amongst the ribbons and ruffles, the mindset of maintaining modesty with beauty also meant that if one's appearance did provoke marital prospects, it had to dutifully downplay both confidence and the occasional antelope leap in social class. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine the duress of ensuring one does not hyperspace into the airs and graces of Europe's grandest rooms when perhaps a playful jaunt through the parlor sufficed. With these curious notions swirling gently like a lull beside the firelight's gentle flicker, one cannot help but reflect upon the whimsical elements that made beauty such a toe-spun dance in the era of Dickens and crinoline. Such Beaumont beauties navigated a society tied finely in its corset strings, never a thread loose, never a hair astray. As the heartbeats of history softly unwind, we find our imaginations knitting together a reverent and yet gaily considerate ode to epochs past. Let those curious daydreams carry us further as we step lightly onto another scene of Victorian vibrance, where beauty's embrace weaves a fabric of tales yet softly spun into the unknown. In the tapestry of Victorian society, threads of beauty were complicated with knots of peculiarity, particularly when that beauty threatened to shine a bit too brightly, like an overly ambitious star trying to outshine the moon. Such was the curious case of a lady named Harriet, who lived in the swirling bustle an equally swirling fog of Victorian London. With eyes like a summer's noon and hair that flowed like golden syrup, Harriet was what one might call the embodiment of a classical beauty, perhaps more classical than anyone was comfortable with. Now Harriet possessed a face that could launch not just 1,000 ships, but maybe even an entire fleet. However, this blessing carved out its own conundrum in a society obsessed with decorum. The societal elite floundered around her presence, entranced yet bewildered by her charm, all while trying to adhere to Victorian conventions tighter than a too small corset. Victorian society, you see, was like that oddly shaped piece in a jigsaw puzzle that never quite fit, endlessly intriguing, yet perpetually perplexing. For Harriet, walking through Hyde Park was both a joyous promenade through silken green and an exercise in tactful navigation. She was always followed by furtive glances and hushed whispers, their exuberance only matched by the bold sparrows flapping about without so much as a "pardon me." In truth, her beauty was seen as much a commodity as it was considered a menace, her charm likened to a flaming torch in a dustbin of apprehensions. The Victorian tabloids loved nothing more than a good saga, and what better than the dilemma of dazzling Miss Harriet? Columnists, armed with quills and surplus imagination, spun yarns of her alleged liaisons, painting her not merely as an angel, but perhaps with a slight devilish twist. After all, why? Allow the truth to moulder inconveniently in the daylight when it could dance provocatively under the glow of gaslight, like a particularly agile moth. All the while, Harriet seemed to float daintily above the fray, aware that her society treated her visage like a public monument, appreciated but never quite understood. Her evenings were a patchwork of balls, banquets, and ceaseless chaperoning, which, frankly, she found as tedious as a cup of lukewarm tea. Little did her admirers realize, she relished the moments of solitude when she could secretly stitch her own quilts, weaving stories in yarn that she could never tell in conversation. Despite the paparazzi of parasols swarming her presence, Harriet knew the real challenge of possessing such beauty was finding someone who yearned to know the heart hiding beyond the pale cheeks and rosebud lips. You see, the Victorians were masters of hiding complex emotions under simple exteriors, like keeping a thunderstorm discreetly tucked inside a perfectly tied bonnet. One breezy afternoon, while juggling her societal obligations with the proficiency of a seasoned vaudevillian, Harriet met a certain Mr. Theodore Lightbody. To the untrained eye, he was as ordinary as a potato, but Harriet noted something more, a quiet intelligence like the waters beneath a gentle brook. Intrigued, she realized this was not a typical theater of gazes and polite questioning. There was wit, humor, and a spark she hadn't witnessed splutter into flames before. Their courtship was a dance, not unlike the latest Viennese waltz sweeping through London. They communicated through books, shared secret notes in dusty tomes at the local library, concealing their true affection in volumes no one else was likely to open. Dickens, with his convoluted plots and charming yet exhausting characters, made the perfect accomplice. Thus, amid the picturesque chaos imposed by her beauty, Harriet navigated her Victorian existence with a quiet wit and resilience. Her life was akin to a symphony, sometimes in grand, sweeping melodies, other times in gentle, intimate lullabies. And as our carriage rolls gently down the cobblestoned runway of time, we are left to consider how beauty, both a blessing and a burden in historical annals, found its own way to embrace the heart within. As Harriet and Mr. Lightbody's story continues to weave through the narrative of their lives, a new chapter of unexpected encounters and delicate waltzes awaits just around the corner as our tale dances onward. As the moon lazily drifts through the night sky, casting a silvery glow over the streets of London, let us turn our attention to the delicate topic of corsets, those exquisite contraptions that embrace the Victorian torso with more resolve than a friendly anaconda. Now one must first appreciate that in this era, being able to breathe or bend weren't considered necessary attributes, and neither was anything beyond 16-inch waists. The Victorian corset was the quintessential symbol of beauty, but its seductive grip was not without its perils. Fashioned with enough steel boning to make a blacksmith blush, these corsets offered less support and more suffocation. Each morning, ladies across the land would enlist armies of maids in a relentless tug-of-war, reminiscent of a maritime crew hoisting sails, all in pursuit of that enviable hourglass figure. Of course, achieving such magnificence came with side effects, ranging from fainting spells to the more dire displacement of internal organs, reminding one that being too beautiful might require the subtle art of collapsing onto a chaise lounge with flourish and grace. Swoon strategically, and you'd have a team of concerned admirers at your feet, which, let's be honest, was the Victorian version of a high-stakes flirtation opportunity. But why stop at the corset? To be truly beautiful in the Victorian sense, one needed to accept that health was a negotiable commodity. The application of various face creams and makeup potions, containing quite the horror show of ingredients, arsenic and lead, naturally, ensured pallor and elegance worthy of an alabaster goddess, or, if we are being honest, a spectral wraith. And all this was achieved while daydreaming through a haze of arsenic vapors, each lady mimicking the latest literary heroine, perhaps Jane Eyre, minus the Gothic drama, but with plenty of Gothic garb. Yet for those daring enough to embrace beauty's risks, social appearances were nothing short of a theatrical venture. Picture this. A lady arrives at a ballroom entrance, drawing collective gasps not only for her impossibly narrow waist, but also for the sheer logistics of entering the room sideways, lest her crinoline create a minor upheaval, disrupting societal niceties like rutabagas and soup dishes at dinner. Our Victorian sisters, amidst these subtleties, lived lives defined by the invisible rules of beauty with as many layers of complexity as their own attire. They danced through life in tulle, lace, and whispers. Their tales bound not in leather volumes, but in the linen of fashion itself. There is something soothing about imagining them knowledgeably conversing in drawing rooms, perhaps about spiritualism or the latest railway scandal, all the while practicing the refined art of tightly controlled respiration. As the ticking of the grandfather clock brings this chapter closer to the horizon of dreams, one might reflect on the strange irony of beauty as a Victorian beacon, one that lured with its gleam whilst tiptoe tapping around the heart's healthiest desires. Perhaps beauty, much like sleep, requires a balance of surrender and strength to drift gently upon. With thoughts now woven like a gentle Victorian lace, let us float onwards to where whispers at the verge of comfort await, the deepening peace of slumber, where time itself unlaces, like the corsets of our dreams. In the tranquil lavender light of a Victorian afternoon, one might find themselves enveloped in a world where beauty and social etiquette danced a careful waltz. The genteel folks sipping tea on the manicured lawns of Britain were never too far removed from the perils that beauty could bestow. For those esteemed ladies deemed excessively alluring, one could feel more at risk than an open bottle of laudanum at a dinner party. Imagine, if you will, that our protagonist is Miss Arabella Peabody, renowned across London not only for her radiant countenance that rivaled the glow of 1,000 gas lamps, but also for her slight oblivion towards the melodramatic dangers that her beauty posed. Why, one might ask, would such an enviable feature thrust her into Victorian peril? The answer meanders down the cobbled lanes of societal expectations, where aesthetic admiration often veered headlong into scandal. Arabella, with her lustrous hair cascading like a mahogany waterfall, probably caused more monocles to drop into flustered teacups than Queen Victoria could count knickknacks in her extensive collections. Gossamer gowns and a perfectly poised parasol were her daily armor against the unsolicited advances of fortune seekers and social climbers. An acquaintance with Arabella equaled an automatic ticket to high society, and in some circles, a lively debate on the economic impact of beauty-related threats to the integrity of afternoon promenades. But let us pause and consider the rather amusing cautionary tales of historical mishaps when beauty turned into a double-edged sword. Take, for instance, the much-whispered account of Lady Evelyn Something-Orotha, whose exceptional beauty reportedly incited a duel over the last ginger biscuit during a garden soiree. Alas, rivals of a fair hand were somewhat less adept with rapiers than they were with quick repartee. Evelyn, utterly unimpressed by the whole affair, had but fetched another tin of biscuits from the pantry, leaving the gentlemen to duel their pride into the ground. For Arabella, her beauty presented less swordplay and more societal strategizing. If she so much as smiled too charmingly at a bridge party, her reputation risked toppling like a misplayed card tower. Alas, the constantly sewn tapestry of Victorian rumour-mongering could unravel with just a single misplaced whisper. Gloved fingers might wag and gossip, might gallop through drawing rooms almost as swiftly as a gentleman fleeing the proposal of marriage. Ah, the cumbersome courtship rituals prescribed for our comely dear Arabella. She was forever dodging matchmaking matrons like a collection tax, careful not to embroider her destiny with the wrong pattern of matronly matchmaking gone awry. One hasty courtship could lead to another chapter of her life bound by less desirable social partners, ones who perhaps favoured hunting pheasants over composing sonnets. Yet somehow, Arabella navigated this treacherous sea of expectations with a grace truer than the most well-coiffed ships, in a Thames regatta. Her secret, if one dared whisper it, was a shrewd intellect wrapped in lace and laughter, deft enough to disarm even the sharpest critical tongues. While outwardly basking in the glow of admiration, inwardly she knew the art of playing this classic chess game called Victorian society, where beauty was as dangerous a bishop as it was a beautiful queen. As dusk quieted over London, candles began to flicker, matching the stars appearing shyly one by one in the sky. Miss Peabody returned to her drawing room, pondering the day's adventures with a serene smile and a knowing glance. Tomorrow would bring fresh bouquets of admiration, alongside the occasional thorns of social critique. And so, as the breeze began to carry the evening's promise of restful slumber, our story gently urges you to join Arabella in a blissful state of tranquility, readying yourself for the next chapter's lullaby, where yet another vignette of Victorian beauty might unfurl, serene and unhurried in the embrace of time. In the whimsical world of Victorian society, being too beautiful was considered a double-edged sword, slicing delicately through social gatherings like an unfortunately attractive slice of cake. While one's beauty could launch them to the very zenith of social echelons, it carried with it the weight of suspicion and scandal that could very well lead to one's undoing. Oh, the paradoxical plight of a Victorian Venus. Picture, if you will, a grand ballroom glimmering with the light of 1,000 chandeliers, each crystal facet twinkling like a symphony of tiny stars intent on outshining whichever debtor had unwisely spent their entire inheritance on this very gathering. Amidst the whirl of silk and the rustle of taffeta, Eleanor Harrington stood, a veritable siren in human form. Eleanor's beauty, however, was rumoured not to be of this world. Sophisticated whispers floated through perfumed air that perhaps Miss Harrington had struck a bargain with a wayward fae or some other mischievous creature of the night. And so, a tale of caution sprung from the lips of the envious. For in the Victorian mind, beauty was less a gift and more a cunning test of character, one cloaked in layers of pastel etiquette and tightly whaleboned attires. Young women like Eleanor were expected to tread carefully, their beauty a precarious asset that might render them vulnerable to being labelled as dangerous. The pressure to maintain one's moral standing was akin to a tightrope walk. One errant slip, a hem out of place, a smile misinterpreted, and scandal was sure to follow on its scandalous heels. Hysteria was the fashionable medical diagnosis of the day, a catch-all of epic proportions ready to scoop in any misfortune or social faux pas a beautiful woman encountered, from fainting due to a corset too tightly pulled to outright refusal of a gentleman's unwanted attention. Eleanor, too, though demure and ever so courteous, was not immune to such claims. Had she laughed too gaily at the dance? Surely it was hysteria. But dear listeners, let us not forget the suitors. An assembly line of would-be companions artfully assembled, each aspiring to court, wed, and subsequently boast of possessing such exquisite loveliness within their otherwise ordinary households. Eleanor's life became a curious negotiation of keeping amorous advances and suspicions at bay, while trying not to be so excessively charming as to invite ruination. Imagine enduring the passionate intensity of sonnets being languidly recited at you with all the subtlety of a stampede of well-dressed wildebeests, or the endless parade of gifts ranging from the delightfully impractical, oh, yet another unplayable harp, to the grotesquely inedible, candies swirling in so much sugar they could outfluff clouds. Eleanor managed to navigate these social waters with remarkable grace. Yet, as with any good illustration of historically absurd irony, one's very survival in Victorian society often meant carefully managing one's own downplay. Thus, Eleanor, clever as she was, came to regularly don slightly less vivid attire, her gowns subtly muted, as if she were a vibrantly colored portrait deliberately aged under benign candlelight. Her laughter grew softer, more like a breeze tickling the pages of an unwelcome ledger than the clarion of a stentorian opera. To top it all, she found herself encouraged to embark on repetitively tedious drawing sessions. Eggs, baskets, and teacups lay strewn across her canvases like a veritable carnival of mundane objects, a valuable metaphorical shield against accusations of otherworldliness. Taken up in inevitable resignation, drawing was now Eleanor's fortifying duvet, a respectable hobby deemed befitting of a young woman with comely charms, lest too much vivacious beauty tenuously disturb the peace. As the night deepens and shadows soften edges into soothing blur, let this chapter settle over you like a feathered cloak of understanding. Sleep starts to caress the corners of your eyes, much how Eleanor managed to cloak her beauty with softer hues for a more serene existence. But lest your dreams slip away too far, the story shall soon meander into yet another delightfully quaint episode of Victorian intrigue. Unfurl with us yet another layer of the era's whimsies and woes as the night continues to cradle you ever so gently, as our narrative lantern continues to flicker down the cobblestone paths of Victorian society. We find ourselves peering into the whimsical yet perilous world of Victorian beauty pageantry, an endeavor simultaneously earnest and absurd, oftentimes resembling a sort of primitive sideshow for faces. Yes, dear listener, what might appear to us as merely a parade of corseted extravagance and well-coiffed hairdos was, for the ladies of Victorian times, a perilous trapeze act between admiration and scandal. Our tale tonight begins with a beauty contest more, akin to a gladiatorial spectacle, minus the lions, albeit featuring its own assortment of gossip-hungry gazers and merciless judges who wielded their fans with all the vigor of a matador. Imagine, if you will, a grand ballroom adorned with lace and velvet, where chandeliers peddled 1,000 tiny stars across the room. This was the arena where beauty could become a blessing, or trouble's favorite disguise. One's eligibility to compete wasn't merely skin deep. Oh no. Reputation and social standing played as much of a role as the ability to bat an eyelash at just the right angle to make a gentleman blush. 'Twas a skill indeed, almost lost to the annals of time. Now let us introduce one Miss Arabella Smythe, a creature of such porcelain perfection that even the seraphs might mistake her for one of their own. Little did our fair Arabella know, her exceptionally symmetrical visage had set into motion a ripple of Victorian anxiety that seemed to heighten with every dimpled smile she bestowed. As the story spread of her beauty, so did the whispers warning of its inherent dangers. You see, being too enchanting presented its own jeopardies. For one, there was the unspoken presumption that such a woman must naturally be up to some peculiar sorcery, lest how else could she remain so painfully delightful to the eye? In a society overflowing with intrigue and embroidery, it often seemed easier to believe that dark forces were at play than genes or, heaven forbid, excellent skincare. Furthermore, the Victorian gentleman, while ostensibly stoic, could be scandalously generous with his affections, unknowingly, of course, through absolutely no fault of her own, except perhaps possessing devastatingly captivating features. Arabella found herself entangled in a storm of admirers, each one keen to outdo the last in showering her with copious floral arrangements and sonnets, presumably penned in caffeine-fueled hazes. Of course, for every gentleman smitten, there lurked a jealous competitor or a conspiring matchmaker beside a punch bowl, amiably plotting with a devious gleam in the spectacles. These were the true victors of the Victorian society ball, those who could weave webs of gossip thick enough to ensnare even the cleverest swan-like beauty. Yet, despite the drama, there was a sweetness to these contests that resembled a half-forgotten dream, wherein all who participated were puppeteers in a social marionette theatre, each one craning their neck to catch a glimpse of admiration, all while ensuring they were poised ever so dramatically beneath the masquerade of decorum. As the evening sun dips below the horizon in our narrative, casting long nostalgic shadows on this peculiar chapter, we leave Arabella in tranquility, surrounded by an ocean of roses and words of affection, a paradox of her era. In the world where beauty teetered deliciously close to calamity, we wave goodbye to the fancy and prepare our hearts for the mellow hush of sacred twilight, eager to whisper secrets that lie quietly beneath the layers of lace and history. In the twinkling glow of oil lamps in Victorian parlors, wafts of skepticism and a hint of scandalous intrigue floated through the air. Here, amid mannerly conversations, a most peculiar notion was whispering its way into households and high society alike, the peril of excessive beauty. But one might inquire, how could something so pleasing to the eye be fraught with danger? Well, dear listener, allow us to take a gentle stroll down cobblestone memory lanes to uncover this Victorian conundrum. Imagine this. You are a young lady of the late 19th century, possessing an ethereal beauty, your cheekbones kissed by sunlight, hair cascading like a waterfall of silk, and eyes shimmering with the promise of 1,000 daydreams. A face that could launch 1,000 tea parties, one might grandiosely proclaim. But alas, in the society of Queen Victoria, such pulchritude carried with it a particular set of perils. For starters, being too beautiful was rumoured, humorously enough, to potentially lead to hysteria. While the gentlemen of the period debated politics and railway expansions, women found themselves under the scrutinising gaze of a society convinced that excessive beauty could result in irrational emotional outbreaks. The remedy? Visits to the ever-so-popular rest cure, ostensibly a vacation from one's own lovely visage, yet more accurately, an extended layabout, or perhaps an excuse to nap away the hours in splendid seclusion with inevitable doses of dubious tonics. Now, should you dare venture beyond the confines of your boudoir, your beauty might be weaponized against you in the court of public opinion. Dubbed an adventure in vanity, these society gatherings, with their elaborate balls and opulent attire, were arenas in which your beauty was placed under judgment. At best, your looks might earn you enviable social connections, or even a marriage proposal from an admirably moustached gentleman who possessed a particularly impressive collection of elaborately tasseled waistcoats. At worst, whispers around clinking glasses could label you an attention seeker, a fate worse than oversteeped Earl Grey. Then there were the more curious notions, Victorian era's phrenologists or skull whispers, who confidently suggested that the shape and size of one's cranium could determine intellect and character. Imagine the dismay if, among the compliments on your grace, some chap with a pair of calipers determined that your forehead lacked the proper dimensions, thereby nullifying your stunning visage with a damning prognosis of feeble-wittedness. Could beauty be so great a misleader, hinting at intelligence it seemingly lacked? But while these notions vexed not a few, there's also something incredibly charming in the Victorian tendency to view beauty as something capable of toppling kingdoms, or at least causing gentlemen to become entranced. A type of beauty that bewilders and beguiles. Much like carrying a fragile, exquisite Dresden teapot precariously at the height of a lively waltz, the art of possessing beauty was as much about balance as allure. Of course, not all views were as grim. Some realized the gentle power imbued in such beauty, a quiet revolution draped in silk and lace. For the wisest of these captivating figures, the real beauty lay in creativity, art, and voice, a more pleasant endeavor than any lavish ball and carved corset could ever constrict. So there you lay, resplendent and contemplating, listening to the chiming of the grandfather clock, its rhythmic tick a soothing lullaby. As you drift further into a state of gentle repose, coddled by the whispers of history, know that beauty, with its splendors and its sensationalized threats, was never merely skin-deep. It was only one of many curious facets of a world both past and perpetually alive in the stories it inspires. There, wrapped in twilight's gentle embrace, our Victorian journey meanders calmly into the ensuing pathways that history invites us to stroll, hinting at what other gentle musings the next Victorian mystery might unfold. In the heart of the Victorian era, beauty was both a blessing and a curse, as perplexing as Charles Dickens's never-ending sentence structures. Oh, the tangled web of social expectations. If you were so unfortunate as to be possessed of excessive loveliness, you might have found yourself the center of unwanted attention, perhaps akin to being chased across a ballroom floor by an overzealous suitor with a questionable handlebar mustache, all while you tried desperately to protect your best crinoline dress from a spill of raspberry tart. In the social circus of the 19th century, catching the Duke's eye might sound like the hopeful dream of a romantic heroine. But beware, a Duke's eye, sharp like an eagle spotting prey, could lead to all sorts of troublesome entanglements. We're talking the kind that could result in unsolicited poetry stuffed into your bonnet or, heaven forbid, unexpected and hasty proposals of marriage delivered like telegrams summoned at a moment's notice. Now, let's ponder Mrs. Euphemia Gloriana Whitchamble, a famed beauty of her age, a woman whose visage could send a ripple of sighs through the most stoic gathering of clergymen. Euphemia found her attractiveness to be something of a double-edged kerfuffle. Walking down the cobbled streets of London was nigh on impossible without causing the kind of commotion suitable for a parade. Pigeons would momentarily pause their cooing, and exceedingly polite whistles would float through the air like musical protests. One must remember poppets of the naptime realm that appearing excessively appealing in the Victorian period was not simply a matter of societal chaos. It also wafted an aroma of moral suspicion. Yes, dear listener, too much beauty could be viewed as downright scandalous. The moral compass of the time would surely quiver like jelly in a storm had it caught sight of a lady whose visage could rival the Greek goddesses. In their eyes, such allure was clearly the sign of the devil's own handiwork, or at the very least, a bit of suspicious witchcraft mixed with the perfume of existential dread. Picture, if you will, a young lady breezily twirling her parasol in Hyde Park, unaware that an admiration society made up of eligible and some not-so-eligible bachelors has started its surreptitious congregation in her immediate vicinity. Their shared purpose, to woo, wow, and win with words more outrageous than the patterns found on Victorian wallpapers. But marital prospects aside, there lay the nuanced danger of becoming a muse for an artist. One might end up immortalized in oil paints, forever marveling at a souffle. Portraits during this era held a curious place in the hierarchy of artistic endeavors, often measuring much less talented than they were ambitious. If our dear Miss Whitchamble found herself the subject of such artistic ambition, there was a decent chance that her eyes would find themselves painted suspiciously keen to the point of looking as if they knew a secret or two about the artist's lunch menu. One could never be sure. Yet it's within these quirks and quandaries that we find the comforting cadence of history's gentle embrace. While beyond the gaslights and during the extravagant tea parties, life in Victorian society may seem a rather complicated stitch in time. It was all a grand tapestry, woven with splendid mischief. Our journey through this realm of beauty and bedazzlement is, you see, a delightful trundle through tales of old, best enjoyed with a thoughtful yawn and a languid lull before the chiming of the hour. But rest assured, dear listeners, there are still whispers to discover, stories untold that hide behind the fringed draperies of this charming epoch. Adjust your metaphorical blanket. Feel the weight of dreams as they promise to carry a Victorian encore into your sleepy abode, where another tale awaits just beneath the surface of your fluttering lashes. The Victorian era, an age steeped in both elegance and eccentricity, harbored an intriguing conundrum, the paradox of perilous beauty. It was a time when having a divine visage was not merely a blessing but a burden, akin to wandering through a Victorian garden party with a bear, majestic yet highly impractical. Society, with its obsession with both modesty and spectacle, created a tapestry of rules that turned a simple glance in the mirror into a strategic maneuver as complex as a round of chess. Our story resumes in a grand drawing room, swathed in heavy velvet drapes and littered with taxidermied home decor, a nod to the era's peculiar aesthetic. Within its plush confines, we find Miss Eliza Worthington, a lady of reputed beauty, though burdened with an unfortunate disposition to sneeze in bursts loud enough to startle her father's pet parrot. Despite her mucus mishaps, her beauty was whispered about in salons across London, like the hottest new novel by Mr. Dickens himself. In Victorian times, beauty was dangerous, not just because it invited attentions of the unsavory sort, but also because it demanded rigorous adherence to quite literally face-saving strategies. For instance, Eliza had been advised by her grandmother, a rather colourful character whom time had endowed with a cranky parrot on her shoulder and a monocle lens she never used, that her porcelain skin must avoid direct sunlight as though it were liable to dissolve like sugar in tea. Sporting bonnets larger than some circuses, Eliza moved through the world with grace, albeit she had the turning radius of a horse-drawn carriage. Beauty, dear listener, was like a game of societal high stakes. Expressions of admiration needed to be as delicate as the lace on one's petticoat, lest they instigate a tangled web of repercussions. Admirers were often embroiled in a courtship ritual that mirrored an exotic bird's display, minus the feathers, but adding cravats, which, let's be honest, served no other purpose than ornamentation and to mildly simulate strangulation. Then there was the matter of attire. In a world where women trust themselves into what could only be described as the Victorian equivalent of athletic compression wear, fashion was as suffocating as admiration could be. Eliza, who was famously fond of a dress that resembled the drapery of an exceptionally grand but possibly haunted mansion, understood that being the image of beauty meant mastering the art of skirting the lines of propriety while maneuvering around the Victorian footstools of expectation, small but devilishly placed. One evening, amid a gathering bedecked in all the fineries that seemed to scream, "My family invented a new kind of spoon," Eliza stood, a vision of lace decorum and reflection. She recalled her governess's cautionary tales of Medusa, not as a monster, but as an exemplar of misunderstood allure. Beauty, her governess had whispered over particularly weak tea, the only type permitted naturally, was perilous because it had the power to freeze time, if only for a moment, in those who gazed upon it. As Eliza drifted through the room, she marveled at the peculiar dance she performed, to attract, yet not too conspicuously, to engage but never embellish, lest rumors spread as swiftly as a series of unfortunate witticisms. In this parlor of motifs and humane taxidermy, she understood that beauty, at its core, was a matter of balance, a tightrope walk attended by all the pomp and precise theatrics Victorian society demanded. As night descended and the energy of the gathering began to wane, Eliza retired to her chamber, a place of solitude where one could ponder an age where essence clashed with appearance and reputation was delicately stitched into a corset. She resolved, perhaps whimsically, but with an air as assured as the ticking of her grandfather clock, that true beauty might just lie in the gentle unruliness of being human, a slight imperfection that, like a warm blanket on a chilly night, bestows a tender comfort amid the high tide of societal expectations. With the tail end of sprawling ball gowns swirling through moonlit halls and whispers softening into the cool embrace of slumber, we sense the whims of history guiding us to yet further tales, gently nudging open the door of tomorrow's pondering parade. as the moon cast its silvery glow over London, let's drift into the ornate drawing rooms of Victorian society, where beauty had its own peculiar perils. Yes, being considered too beautiful back then was less of a blessing and more of a gentle curse wrapped in a velvet corset. Imagine the paradox where every day felt like walking a tightrope between admiration and scandal, set to the soothing hum of horse-drawn carriages clattering down cobblestone, our streets. In 19th century society, beauty was both a currency and a liability, a double-edged quill, if you will, when it came to navigating the labyrinth of social events. You see, while a lovely visage ensured invitations to the finest events, there was also the ever-present fear of the swarm. Oh yes, the swarm was the nickname given to those scandalous gossip circles that could turn the smallest blunder into the juiciest tabloid fodder, populating drawing room chatter faster than you could say cucumber sandwiches. Take Miss Clara Beaumont, for instance, the toast of the ton and the cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Her crime: having eyes as expressive as a poet's diary and lips that resembled the perfect ripe cherry. Alas, Clara's splendid appeal caught the attention of Lord Paddington, whose wits, I'm afraid to say, were as stuffed as his waistcoat. Lord Paddington's interest sparked an outrage amongst dames who considered themselves the rightful lords of every manner's eligible beauty realm. These dames with noses held high enough to scrape the unfortunate soot escaping London's chimneys dedicated themselves to dethroning Clara through a series of imaginarily intoxicating tales of scandal. Despite possessing a charm that could sway the most callous of Empire waist dress fins, Miss Beaumonte soon found herself the subject of fierce scrutiny and unflattering caricatures sketched by renegade artists looking for entertaining subjects outside gloomy landscapes. The artists, however, had forgotten to sharpen their pencils, leaving Clara with little more than a comically enlarged snoot and a wardrobe that bore an uncanny resemblance to someone's grandmother's curtains. The social punishment, so seemingly unjust, came merely from the novelty of her attractiveness becoming a public menace, a dangerous flame that threatened to ignite jealousy like dried kindling in January. Yet a delicate contradiction persisted. Social success in Victorian society hinged upon one's appearance, and yet stepping over that fine, floral border of acceptable levels of beauty was akin to falling through a trapdoor into a parlor filled with finger-wagging chaperones. Beauty and decorum were the yin and yang of social success, but tipping the scales too much towards one side could lead to, well, a lonely evening spent with only long novels and cats for company. Even Queen Victoria, with her penchant for structure and propriety, couldn't resist joining the symphony of judgment. It was rumoured Her Majesty believed an exquisite countenance could potentially overshadow a lady's more commendable qualities, like embroidery skills, that ultimate measurement of Victorian accomplishment. Her court was, after all, a place where the tapestry of gentility was stitched one stitch at a time, ensuring one did not stray beyond their skills with needle and thread, lest the social stitch unravel. But fear not for our darling Clara, for destiny had no intention of binding her future to mere sketches and tea-party tittle-tattle. The gentle twist of a future chapter awaited, as vibrant knights with crumpled neckties and somewhat dented top hats moved about the board game of life, ready to defy the norms and seek beauty beyond the superficial. So let us settle down, close our eyes, and listen to the soft rustle of Clara's pages as her story gracefully unfurls. As we drift into the night, awaiting the next tale unwound by softly ticking timepieces and the welcoming pull of dreamy clouds. In the gentle haze of a Victorian twilight, where gas lamps flickered and long shadows stretched lazily across cobblestone streets, there emerged peculiar echoes of beauty beyond the marble busts and painted portraits adorning the walls of spirited drawing rooms. It was a time when calling someone too beautiful might be more than a flattering compliment, more like a delicate dance upon a societal tightrope, where one false step might lead to a rather unseemly misstep. Ah, the Victorian era, when women were enveloped in layers of lace and crinoline, their figures as poetically exaggerated as their societal roles. It was an epoch when beauty could be a double-edged sword, and one's likeness to an ethereal being could incite whispers that were, shall we say, less than angelic. To be deemed too beautiful was akin to being accused of witchcraft centuries before, a glide too close to an ideal that few understood but many eyed with suspicion. Consider the fate of the professional beauties, those fortunate or perhaps unfortunate lasses whose countenances graced everything from art academies to advertising posters, the Kardashians of their day, albeit in corsets rather than couture. They were admired, yes, but also scrutinized under the intense gaze of society's magnifying glass, where a jewel was just as likely an object of envy as of admiration. Enter Lily Langtry, the Jersey Lily, whose captivating visage made her the muse of painters and poets alike, as well as the subject of scandalous gossip. Her real transgression: being too conspicuously lovely for the time. Her beauty drew suitors like moths to a flame, and naturally, scandal followed, creeping at her heels as quickly as the morning mist. In an era when modesty was the fashion, the audacity of Lily's luminous presence was enough to make proper Victorian ladies swoon, not from jealousy, mind you, but from the sheer gravitational pull of her charm. But it wasn't just women who faced the dangers of being too comely. Oscar Wilde, with his sharp wit and surprisingly splendid visage, found himself often tangled in a society more eager to censure his looks than celebrate them. His contribution to the arts, or indeed his very existence, was a painting of Dorian Gray come to life. Scrutinized, paraded, and ultimately vilified, Wilde's beauty became a kind of societal Rorschach test, exposing the grotesque insecurities of Victorian propriety lurking just beneath the surface. Indeed, beauty was as much an illusion as any other ideal in Victorian society, a gleaming veneer over a more complex and turbulent reality. Amidst the reverent hush of parlours filled with polished oak and delicate bone china, beneath the genteel bows and curtsies, nestled the unspoken rule: beauty was to be admired, but only from a safe distance. Like the fragile porcelain dolls that adorned many a mahogany music box, those too perfect faces could inspire unease, a vague reminder of whispered tales about queens of bygone eras turned melancholy and misfortune. Of course, by this point in our restful rumination, you might find that you too are gently swayed by the lull of our tale. The intricate corsets of historic allure have wrapped themselves around you, whispering sweet secrets of a time when appearance was both everything and nothing at all. And as the soft embrace of sleep beckons with its siren call, you are gently reminded that, in the Victorian parlour of dreams, the conversation always returns to the trivial charm of the mundane, stirring just enough curiosity to drift dreamily across the border into the land of chapter 24, where the final echoes of our melodious exploration await. As we find ourselves gently floating through the hazy final chapter of our whimsical journey through Victorian society, we linger on one last luminous figure, a woman whose beauty was said to rival even the most elaborate floral arrangements decking the grand Victorian ballrooms. Her tale, as sparkling as it was shadowed, offers the perfect lullaby for our wandering thoughts, readying us to drift towards slumber. Amelia Lavishworth, a name whispered with both admiration and something akin to dread in the bustling streets of London. Known far and wide for her breathtaking loveliness, Amelia walked, or perhaps glided, through life as if she were a living Botticelli painting, a fact that, in those peculiar times, made her more a curio than a compatriot in the eyes of many a Victorian soul. Our dear Amelia, however, was more than just a living artwork. She was, shall we say, a bit of a trickster, one who delighted in twisting the knickers of polite society with not only her beauty, but her sharp, irreverent wit. How did she, you ask, manage to navigate the treacherous waters of downright dangerous good looks? Ah, therein lies our tale to end all tales. Picture, if you will, a grand evening ball beneath flickering gas lamps, where the rich scent of 1,000 hothouse roses mingles with the palpable anticipation that only the promise of gossip can bring. Amelia, in a gown spun seemingly from midnight and moonbeams, stood upon the threshold, drawing every eye like a ship's lantern drawing moths. Her secret weapon this particular evening was a devastatingly well-cultivated feathery fan, behind which she orchestrated precisely timed fluttering glances. Yet Amelia had mastered more than just the art of intrigue at a distance. She had a cunning plan, a plan to subtly remind those dazzled by her looks that beauty alone did not define her. As she navigated her way through the peacock fanfare of puffed sleeves and lace collars, Amelia engaged in what can best be described as social sleight of hand. Conversations with her would sway like a dance, smoothly transitioning from the vapid pleasantries to clever comments that challenged societal norms. More than once, her jarring quips about women's rights or a particularly ludicrous social rule silenced her more forward suitors, those who mistakenly valued her for her visage alone. But Amelia's most audacious maneuver involved the strategic deployment of the scandalous smile, one that struck like a sunbeam breaking through English fog, always appearing right after she'd uttered something particularly scandalous, disguised as mere friendly banter. For example, she might suggest in passing that Queen Victoria's dress code edicts could use a bit of lightening, much like her sponge cakes, or that attending church 2 days in a row might induce spiritual indigestion. Such was the subtlety of her approach that before her audience realized the mockery within the charm, they were already chuckling along, often entirely complicit in the joke without knowing how. Amelia's reputation for wit and beauty spread as quickly as a particularly chatty London fog, bringing her an invitation to the most exclusive of soirees and eventually a proposal from an unexpected quarter, a gentleman of devilish humor and benign disposition who appreciated her most for the wit beneath her winsome visage. He no doubt was captivated not by what she looked like, but by the razor's edge on which she balanced beauty and brains with such flair. Eventually, as the years melted by, Amelia and her beloved prankster companion retired to a sprawling countryside home where they hosted many a salon that would be whispered about, half in shock and half in envy, across the lands. Together they crafted an exquisite life, seemingly untouched by the wear of time, made vibrant by their shared love of poking gentle fun at the world around them. As the moon casts her gentle glow upon our concluding pages, let Amelia's tale lull you to rest, a soft reminder of how complexity can challenge the clarity of our perceptions, even in the most ostentatious eras. For, dear listener, it is often in our silent moments, those nestled tightly as we are about to drift off, that we find new angles to the stories we thought we knew, waiting patiently for us to explore them upon waking. And now we repose, sheltered under the starry canopy of the night sky, wrapped warmly in the quilt of tales long told and yet still echoing their gentle reminders. A quilt that, as all storytellers know, is never truly finished, but always ready to enfold us again and again in its soft, peaceful embrace.